We can, yeah.
Okay. He said, if you have a legacy in photography, it will be in the form of some kind of print like this. He said, I'm not sure that you will. And to myself, I said, well, thanks a lot. You know?
Thanks.
But it impressed upon me, and he said, the art of photography is the print. He said, it's not taking pictures. That's half of your job. So I took that to heart, and I got involved. He made this system called the Zone system, and I mastered that, and I taught it for 20 years. And I was always pursuing the final print, and I got involved with Epson when they started this whole digital printing thing, and I became an expert in this color management thing. I worked for a company called X-Rite. And I am one of these X-Rite master colorati. I invented the name for them, you know, and that company decides what color your picture is going to look like with the software and hardware. And I worked with them, helping them develop the software and the hardware. And I did this for a number of years. And I worked with the color management experts, the best people in the business. And if I have any talent, it's finding really smart people, you know, and as I say to people all the time, if you're going to copy somebody really good.
Right,
you know?
right.
Like I copied Irving Penn, all right, you know, and I was involved with Irving Penn's studio for more than 25 years. I have all of his books autographed to me. For the last 10 years of his life, Irving Penn only made color prints on an Epson printer that I got him and I built the profiles for.
He didn't. He wanted it that way.
Yeah. He stopped printing. He was printing with a lab in New York City, and and the people that worked for him, his first assistant, studio manager, they all worked for me first. I trained them, and then they went to a good job.
Yeah.
I considered it a compliment, you know.
But it is kind of interesting because I think, you know, a lot of people will come to exposure, and the photographers and people observing, everybody realizes the quality of the print work. But isn't it interesting that really Ansel Adams is somewhat responsible?
Absolutely.
For, his trail is
everywhere.
It's
all a continuum. And I say to everybody, I had really good help. I worked with Isamu Noguchi as his intern. I was a sculptor. That's what I went to school for. I worked with Noguchi. I worked with Ansel Adams. I worked with a great fashion photographer named Neale, who it just turned 90 years old, and we've been friends for more than 50 years. And whatever little success I've achieved, they're responsible for all of it. Those people, the way I look at it, all I can do is pass that information along to other people.
Yeah.
So I had a trustee who was in charge of a little trust fund that I had, who was in charge of my education, and he was pushing me towards a business education. Now I started doing photography when I was 6 years old.
Oh, so you'd always had a camera?
Yeah, always had a camera. I had this sheet film camera. It wasn't quite 4x5, smaller format like that. I had one sheet film holder, and one side of it was broken, so I could only do one picture at a time. And I had no light meter, so I had to guess what the exposure was. And I would process these files in the basement of the house I was living with my grandfather, one picture at a time, and there's light leaks coming in all over the place. There were streaks on the film and everything like that, you know. But there was something about it that that made me feel comfortable. I don't even know exactly what it was, but
you knew it when you were doing it.
Yeah,
this is
it was sort of my refuge. And now the trustee told me, no, you can't do this for a living. You have to go and get a business degree and this and that, and you're smart, so you will go to Harvard and get the business degree, and then you can do photography as a hobby. I said, no, I don't really like that. So I bucked him, and I did what I wanted to do, and then I enrolled in. I got thrown out of a couple of colleges, and I ended up in Boston University in School of Fine and Applied Arts, studying fine art. So I found something that I really enjoyed. I got a couple of other degrees because I just spent so many years in college. I just got the degrees because I was there for 6 years, not because I was ever interested.
You were having a good time?
Yeah. I like chasing the girls,
Did you ever catch any?
Yeah, I caught a
What's
few.
the main thing? Just gotta,
So, I mean, for me, the best thing about college was learning how to do research. It wasn't that I was going to use any of that information that I was studying necessarily.
You like the process of it.
I like learning how to learn, but I got into doing sculpture, and after I got out of college, I went. I moved down to the Caribbean. I had studios. I was doing my photographic career started out as an underwater photographer.
How do you make the decision to leave college and go to the Caribbean? Was it a friend at college, or it seems like such a random move to go from an American college to a
Well,
Caribbean?
I didn't go directly from the East Coast. I went to California first, and I got involved doing underwater photography, and I went.
Okay, so it was a natural
Yeah,
progression.
I went to Australia doing shark behavioral research with the Scripps Institute in La Jolla, and did underwater photography of these great white sharks in the Great Barrier Reef. And so I ran into a guy in St. Thomas that I was friends with, who was an ex-Playboy photography magazine, and he had a little studio in St. Thomas. So I got involved with that and became his assistant and learned how to do this. And then I opened up a studio in San Juan, Puerto Rico, bigger studio, started doing more generalized advertising work, and then made a studio in Caracas, Venezuela, and I worked in Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, and traveled a lot in South America. And during that time period, I worked for the French government as a photojournalist. I went into the jungle with the Yanomamo Indians on the border between Brazil and Venezuela, and the government was trying to get rid of these Indians because they found oil on the land. And I was one of the last people that got a permit to go into the jungle, and I'm photographing these Indians I was 6 weeks in the jungle there, and there was a meter of water in the jungle. I mean, it was a very difficult thing, but I had a great time, and I was almost.
So you must have been incredibly different from people you were experiencing at home.
Yeah.
Because your friends and peers around this.
Yeah, I knew nobody from that little town where I grew up in New Jersey.
They weren't.
And I remember once having a girlfriend in high school, and she said, "Oh yeah, we're going to do this," and I said, "No, we're not doing anything." I said, "I'm out of here." You are so far in the rearview mirror that you don't even realize that.
Yeah.
So I just had the feeling that life had more things to offer than what people had put on my plate. I wasn't interested in eating that dinner. So I traveled here, did that. Then
At the time, though, in your mind, I mean, did you have a goal that it was leading to something, or were you just kind of taking bit?
No.
Comes
I
up,
just
this
knew
comes up.
that I was passionate about the photography,
So you just-
and I wanted to get better and better and better at doing that. So I spent all of my money on cameras and stuff like that. Like some people would buy expensive cars, I spent it all on flash equipment, lenses. I remember when I was young, when I left California and came to the Caribbean, I was living on an unemployment claim from the state of California. So all of the money that I got from there, I wouldn't spend any of that for food or anything like that. That was illegal. It all went into buying cameras
So you had your priorities straight.
Yeah. I wanted to do that, and the money that I had to, I got money from different sources.
So you're bouncing around the world, setting up studios, and you get back, and this is your first real studio.
Yeah, in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and this is kind of the epicenter of action, music, and film.
And I had moved there from San Juan, Puerto Rico, and I had a letter from a banker down there that, Douglas has been doing business with Chase Manhattan Bank or something like that. And I needed money to build this studio. And Los Angeles is a serious thing, I needed some serious money.
So you're obviously a very hands-on person. You built the studio yourself.
Yeah, well, not that I hired really good people to do this. I'm not good with a hammer and nails.
Okay, yeah.
So I get to Los Angeles and I go to this bank and I meet this banker, and he had the same first name as mine, Douglas. And he gave me $25,000 just based upon my name. No collateral or anything like that. He said, listen, you can't let me down. You got to make these payments on time and everything. So I was very religious about that. I built the studio. I got a good plumber. I got a good, I had a great dark room built. It was a big studio, 100 feet by 30 feet with 25-foot ceilings. And I painted the floor with this special white polyurethane paint, and again, I spent every single cent that I had to make this thing, and I started working. Then to make money, I was teaching photography. I had these classes. I'd get 15 or 20 people to take these classes. It was how I was paying my rent. And in that class one day, this guy signs up for the class, and he comes to me with this little book of Polaroids, and there are all these famous models from New York. Now, I was smart enough to recognize the girls. I go, what's this? He goes, yeah, I'm a makeup artist. I was working in New York doing all that, and he's showing me all these famous models. I said, oh, really? He said, maybe you'd like to do that. He said, I know all the girls. I do the hair and makeup. I can do the styling and stuff like that.
You can do the photography.
Yeah. So I said, okay, let's give this a shot. So it was just by luck. You asked me, did I have a plan? I never had a plan of anything. I'd go out the door, and do you go left or you go right? I don't know. If I go right, maybe it's the police pick me up. If I go left, I don't know what it is. But so I hooked up with him. His name was David Frank Ray, and we became a good team, and we started doing this work, and I got successful at it. I did my first Vogue magazine cover when I was 23 years old. That was a big deal for a 23-year-old. And then I started doing...
Because then you're suddenly up in that echelon of people activity.
Yeah. I started doing cosmetic ads for all the major cosmetic companies, Redken and Max Factor, and because my expertise, even at that young age, was color, getting the color perfect. I could get the skin tones absolutely perfect, so they didn't have to be retouched because typically in those days you would shoot a transparency, they would make what was called a dye transfer print, and they would bleach and dye that print to correct the problems with it, right? And it was a very expensive process. We're talking about $5,000 in the 70s, right, to make one print.
So you were creating correct ads.
Yeah, so the guy who made the dye transfer print, fast forward a few years to when I moved to New York City, there was a guy who was like the god of making those prints. His name was Frank Totaro, and he made the prints for all the major cosmetic companies, for all the major photographers, all the super famous photographers whose names everybody knows. And one day I'm in the studio and the phone rings, and he said, yeah, I want to talk to Douglas. I said, this is Douglas. He said, this is Frank Totaro. I said, oh, why? What are you calling me? What? He goes, I just want to tell you something. And he said, and if you repeat it to anybody, I'm going to tell them that you're a liar. I said, oh, this is going to be an interesting conversation.
Right. This is going to be good. Right?
He said, so here's what I have to say to you. He said, of all of the photographers in New York City, he said, and I make these dye transfers for all the people that you would like to be like someday. He said, you're the only one in New York City that gives me a perfectly balanced color transparency. Now, he said, I lose money with you, because these other people, I get to charge $3,000 per correction, and typically they might have 3 corrections. That's $9,000 just in color. He said, so I lose money for you. He said, and I don't even know why I'm telling you this. He said, but I can tell you, when I get one of your transparencies to make a dye transfer, I know that it's you that did it, and nobody else in New York City could do that. So I always considered that, and I still do today, as one of the greatest compliments, because this was somebody who knew that business, who knew color like dye transfer prints then cost $800 a piece.
Wow.
And he would make 4 of them, and in the upper right hand corner he would put little check marks, and he would check the one that he thought was best. That was one check mark, 2, 3, 4, and he was never wrong. You know,
he was good at his art.
He was great. So I developed a following for that. So I started doing these cosmetic ads that then
But this is what had started in California.
Yeah, started in California.
But you'd now moved across
because there wasn't enough business in California. I did. I started working for a company. It's a good success story called Redken. Now they're called Redken New York now, but they were called Redken Cosmetics. It was in San Fernando Valley in California, and I was all of 23 years old, and I went out to see the creative director of the company, and I said, Joan, listen, here's what we have to do. We have to stop using these California models. They're no good. We have to fly all the girls in from New York. We have to bring all the clothes in from New York and do a good job. She goes, Douglas, this is going to cost me a fortune. You know, now I said, do me a favor. Do it with me for 2 months. And if it isn't successful for you, I'll never talk to you again. Well, it was way beyond successful. Because they would make these prints to put in their salons, and the prints were fabulous, and they were all great girls. And what I did in those days was I sacrificed my fee, so there was enough money to pay for the model. See, I gave my money to the model because then I would have photographs with these famous models from New York City, and people would see that. So as much as I was difficult to get along with, I was also smart.
Right, you knew how you were moving it forward.
I wanted to reinvest in myself, and I always used to say to people in those days, I'm interested in moving vertically, not horizontally. You know, if I did a Vogue magazine cover, so then I started doing Cosmopolitan covers for British Cosmopolitan. I did 2 years contract for that, and British Cosmopolitan would send me a list of celebrities that they wanted to put on the cover, and I would arrange the whole thing. I would do the creative. There was nobody there from the magazine, which was perfect. I prefer not to have anybody there with me. So we did that, and we photographed some very famous people for that, and I did Brooke Shields when she was 14 years old, and I got a little bit into that celebrity thing, but I really wasn't interested in celebrities because they always want to look the same. They don't want to. I preferred models. The models don't tell me, oh, I want to look like this. You know,
they just want a crazy image.
You give them the concept, and they're like chameleons. So that appealed to me more. So I left California and I moved to New York because I wanted to be closer to Europe, to Italy, because that's really where I wanted to end up going. So I put together a nice studio in New York, and then my eyes were on Milan, Italy. You know, because the best publications in the world was Italian Vogue. You know, I said, well, that's what I want to work for. I want to work for the best magazine in the world. Now, I was fortunate because I had a cousin who was a super famous shoe designer. Andrea Pfister was my cousin, and he had all the connections with the magazines. So I came over to Italy, and he took me around and introduced me to the editors of all these magazines. And typically when that happens, they give you a job and you get a little picture like that in the magazine. What did they start me off with? They started me off with the covers, you know. So I did a good job. So the editor.
So you're bouncing through this really quickly. I mean,
well, yeah, it wasn't 2 months. But you know, I'm not so good in the chronological order. But I remember the first job that I did. I'm talking to the magazine editor. And I had been working in New York City, and in New York City, they said, "Oh, we want you to do this. You have to do this." They had all of these rules and everything like that. I went to Italy, and I'm talking to this editor, and she says, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "You're asking me what I want to do? Okay, I want to do this, and I want to do this, and I want to do this." She goes, "Okay, you get the girls, you get the hair and makeup, you do the whole thing, you shoot the job, you process the film, and you bring me the film that you like." I said, "Really? That's the way we work here?" I said, I'm staying here, you know. So I did these covers. They were a big success. I took them back to New York City, and everybody says, "We want pictures like that." I said, "You can't get pictures like that because you're in my hair all the time." I said, "You want pictures like that? You stay out of the studio. You don't even come to the studio. You let me alone." So I knew how to get a good picture, and the Italians, they gave you that control. and partly it was because they were disorganized.
So so what era is this all going on? You're now in the 70s, now in the 80s?
70s and 80s.
So are you yourself being perceived as a famous photographer in those days? I mean, are people saying, "Oh, that's Douglas Dubler"?
Yeah, in Los Angeles, I was a bigger fish in a smaller pond. I was always looking for the bigger pond. I wasn't interested in being the big fish. I wanted to be in that bigger pond. New York City was a bigger pond. I came to New York City. I had a mentor who, Neale, his name was Neale Barr, very, very famous fashion and beauty photographer, did all of these covers for all of these magazines, and he and I have had a 50-year relationship. He's 90 years old now, and I first came into his studio when I was in my early 20s, and Neale is shooting with this thing called Ascor sunlight. It's 40,000 watt seconds coming out of one head, and it had big banks of capacitors to power that were all running on 220 power, and the light would go off, and the flash tube would vibrate for a minute or so, you know, and he's shooting 8x10 transparencies. Well, I never saw this being done before. I had read all of this stuff. I said, okay, this is the real guy here. This is the real guy, and I got to meet him through a guy who had done all of his black and white work, and was somebody that I met in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and then hooked me up with Neale, and I would come up periodically, and he would mentor me. I didn't work for him, but the first time I went to see him, he looked at my portfolio and he said, "Oh no, this is all wrong, and you don't put silk with wool in it." So I'm making all these notes, and I go back to San Juan and I do all the things that he told me was wrong, and I come back with the portfolio, and he said, "Will you actually listen to me?" I said, "Well, if you're nice enough to spend the time with me, of course." So I got mentored by one of the best people, and this, it's why I sought out Ansel Adams, it's why I sought out Noguchi, it's why I sought out the best expert in this color management named Bruce Frazier, who, you know, had taught me all about this color management. So it's sort of my thing. And that's why I tell everybody, if you're going to copy somebody really good. And if you're going to go work for somebody where you're not going to make any money anyway, make sure it's somebody that's really good. So look, when I first came here to Exposure, and I saw, I've been to a number of things done well. I never saw anything done well. I never got treated as well as I got treated here. So, you know, and it was just, it couldn't have been a greater experience for me. So when Simon invited me back again, I said I can't wait, you know, and it just gets better and better and better, and I'm a great ambassador for Exposure and for the country because I like the way things are done here.
Well, Douglas, thank you so much for coming today and sharing stories.